Mr. Bloom, une minute.
Thank you, Mr. Bloom, 1 minute.
Well, just a few observations, if I may, Madam Chairman. I don't trust the Commission. I don't trust the unelected bureaucrats behind the scenes who have meetings where I do not have any minutes. I don't trust this place, which gives a veneer of democracy, political editorial control over things which on the internet, the new medium, the sort of thing that we condemn in China. I don't like it. It smells a bit to me, and I don't know what is going to go on behind the scenes, as the previous speaker just said, what deals are being done that we don't know about. We have perfectly good copyright laws. We have perfectly good data protection laws. That should be enough. I don't want any more control coming to this sinister and corrupt institution.
Rights and freedoms are not so very different from those adumbrated in the constitutions of, say, East Germany or the USSR. But as the citizens of those unhappy polities discovered, paper rights in themselves are worthless in the absence of adequate mechanisms of parliamentary government. There is no crisis of human rights in the European Union, but there is a crisis of democratic legitimacy. Allow me to suggest that one way to ameliorate that crisis would be to keep faith with our voters and put the Treaty of Lisbon, as we promised, to a series of referendums. Pactio Olisipiensis Sensendae est.
I'm surprised we have the front to call this a debate, because the Minister didn't tell us any of the substance of the negotiations. But of course there is no debate, is there? No debate in the national parliaments, no informed opinion in the press, no debate at all. And why? Because this whole treaty is being put together in secret. And that is being done because you don't want to involve the citizens of Europe. You're fearful that the more they find out about your grandiose plans, the more likely they are to vote no. And what's worse still is the downright dishonesty with which this whole process is being pursued. For Angela Merkel, in a letter, to talk about the proposal to use different terminology without changing the legal substance, I mean, it's Alice through the looking glass stuff, isn't it? It's the twisting of language. It is the deliberate attempt to stop there being free and fair referendums in European countries. It's your plan to act like a bulldozer, just to sweep aside the French referendum result, the Dutch referendum result, to pursue your political goals without taking the people with you. Well, I've no doubt you think that you're going to get away with it. But if you're proud of your European project, if you're true Democrats, then you join me in the call for let the people decide their own future. Don't foist it upon them. President, I would like to congratulate you on being elected, although I feel that this morning it's been more like a papal inauguration. And it's rather a shame that this Parliament, if it was a proper Parliament, would actually select members to sit in the chair on ability and not have the usual big group stitch-up. So that's rather a shame. And I think the signs for change here aren't very good. Just yesterday we had Eurocorps, armed Eurocorps soldiers carrying the European flag around the courtyard outside, a sort of European Union version of trooping the colour. We had an orchestra, we had the anthem, we had a choir. We started today, didn't we, with the anthem. This is the same flag and anthem that you said had been dropped after the French and Dutch very sensibly said no to the dreaded EU constitution. You're not even pretending anymore. You're pushing ahead with all the symbols of statehood and trying at the same time to lie and cheat with the Irish by giving them a series of guarantees that are not worth the paper that they are written on. Well, I can tell you that many of us in this Europe of Freedom and Democracy group will do all we can to help the no side in that Irish referendum. The future of European democracy rests very heavily on Irish shoulders. You fought, Mr. President, against the Soviet Union. You fought for democracy. You fought for national self-determination. if you continue to ignore the democratic voice of countries like France, the Netherlands and Ireland, then you will turn the European Union back into that very union that you fought so hard against. Listen to the people, please. Thank you, everybody.
It is really puzzling to me that having just buried one monster, the Soviet Union, another remarkably similar one, the European Union, is being built. Exactly what is the European Union? Perhaps by examining the Soviet version we can get the answer. The Soviet Union was governed by 15 unelected people who appointed each other and who were not accountable to anyone. The European Union is governed by 24 people who appoint each other, meet in secret, and are not accountable to anyone, and whom we cannot sack. One might say that the EU has an elected parliament. Well, the Soviet Union had a parliament of a sort too, the Supreme Soviet, which just rubber-stamped the Politburo decisions, pretty much like the European Parliament does, where speaking time in the chamber is limited within each group and often amounts to 1 minute per speaker. In the EU, there are hundreds of thousands of bureaucrats with their huge salaries, their staff, servants, bonuses and privileges, their lifelong immunity from prosecution, which is simply shuffled from one position to another, no matter what they do or fail to do. Is this not exactly like the Soviet regime? The Soviet Union was created by coercion and very often with a military occupation. The European Union is being created, admittedly not by armed force, but by coercion and economic bullying. In order to continue to exist, the Soviet Union spread itself further and further. The moment it stopped spreading, it started collapsing. And I suspect the same is true of the European Union. We were told that the purpose of the Soviet Union was to create a new historic entity, the Soviet people, and that we must forget our nationalities, our ethnic traditions and customs. The same seems to be true of the European Union. They don't want you to be British or French. They want you all to be a new historic entity, European, to suppress all your national feelings and live as a multinational community. After 73 years, the same system in the Soviet Union resulted in more ethnic conflict than anywhere in the world. In the Soviet Union, one of the grand purposes was the destruction of the nation-state. And that's exactly what we observe in Europe today. Brussels intends to absorb nation-states so that they should cease to exist. Corruption was built into the Soviet system from top down, and so it is in the EU. The same endemic corruption activity that we saw in the old Soviet Union has flourished in the EU. Those who oppose or expose it are silenced or punished. Nothing changes. In the Soviet Union, we had a gulag. I think we have a gulag in the European Union also, an intellectual gulag known as political correctness. When anyone tries to speak their mind on questions of race or gender, or if their views differ from those approved, they will be ostracized. This is the beginning of the gulag, the beginning of your loss of freedom. In the Soviet Union, they told us we needed a federal state to avoid war. In the European Union, they are telling you exactly the same thing. In short, the same ideology underpins both systems. The EU is an old Soviet model presented in Western guise. But again, like the Soviet Union, the European Union has within itself the seeds of its own demise. Unfortunately, when it collapses, and it will leave immense destruction behind, and we will be left with huge economic and ethnic problems. The old Soviet system was incapable of reform, so is the European Union. But there is an alternative to being ruled by those 24 self-appointed officials in Brussels. It is called independence. You don't have to accept what they have planned for you. After all, you have never been asked if you wanted to join. I have lived in your future. and it didn't work.